In a small house just beyond the canyon lived a woman named Clara. The sun rose every day, casting golden light over the jagged rocks and the winding trails. Clara woke to the sound of birds chirping and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. Here, the beauty of nature cradled her, but it was not long before that beauty turned into a nightmare. For years, Clara felt joy in the simple things: the smell of fresh rain on the dusty ground, the warmth of the sun against her skin, and the serene sunsets that painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. The canyon had its own voice, whispering secrets only she could hear. It was a place where her heart felt free. But as the seasons changed, something dark clouded her world. It started with the dry winds. At first, they were gentle breezes, swirling softly around her home. Clara welcomed them. After all, she loved the way those winds carried the scent of wildflowers from the hills. But soon enough, those gentle whispers grew into a violent roar. They churned the dry earth, sucking up the dust, turning it into a thick cloud that suffocated the landscape. Day by day, Clara watched the dust storms roll in, darkening the horizon. They swirled around her house, painting the world gray. She kept her windows shut, covering them with old blankets to keep the dust from settling inside. But no matter how hard she tried, the dust found its way into her life. It crept under doors and through cracks, sticking to everything she loved. Clara found herself alone inside her home, with only the dust as her companion. Her once vibrant garden withered away, flower by flower, until it was nothing but a collection of dry, lifeless twigs. She would often sit on her porch, staring at her barren yard, wondering when her world had turned from colorful blooms to grayscale misery. One evening, after a particularly fierce storm, Clara stepped outside. The air was thick, heavy with grit and sadness. As she looked out at the canyon, she felt a pang of loss. This wasn't just a piece of land, it was her sanctuary, her escape from the noise of the world. But now it felt more like a prison, surrounded by walls of dust. She thought of the other people who lived near the canyon. Many had left. Some took their families and moved far away, escaping to cities filled with life and laughter. Others had resisted, hoping the storms would pass. But as days turned to weeks, it was clear the dust was here to stay. It was relentless, dragging everyone down into its suffocating grip. The canyon was losing its charm, and it was dragging Clara with it. One night, as Clara lay in bed, she listened to the wind howl outside. It felt alive, a thing with teeth, gnashing and tearing at her peace. The dust settled onto her windowsill, an unwelcome guest that left a gritty trail where there had once been light. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She felt trapped in a world that was slowly fading away. Desperation seeped into her heart, and she decided she would not be defeated. She made a plan to fight back. She began to gather old burlap sacks, hoping they could collect some of the dust that swirled around her. Day after day, she filled them with dirt, her hands gouged with scratches and grime. Still, the dust won. It mocked her efforts, rising again and again from the ground with every gust of wind. As the dust storms continued, she started to lose hope. Conversations turned to whispers as neighbors packed their bags and left, one by one. Clara felt a deep ache with each goodbye. What was happening to her community? A deep loneliness settled in, one that was heavier than the dust itself. Then one day she found an old photograph tucked inside a book. It was of her family, smiling under the wide expanse of blue sky. The smiles shone like stars, bright and pure. Clara realized that she hadn't thought about her family in months. They had offered her love and laughter, and here she was, fighting alone against a storm she couldn't control. With that spark of memory, something shifted within her. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling against the screen. It felt foreign, almost like lifting a weight she had abandoned long ago. With shaky hands, she dialed her brother's number, her heart racing as it rang. Clara, his voice came through, warm like a summer breeze. I'm here, she managed to say, her throat tight. In the days that followed, her brother arrived. He brought with him not only his presence, but hope too. They worked together to clean up the house, to fight against the dust that filled every corner. Laughter, once silenced by grief, echoed through the air again, filling the empty spaces. They made a plan for the future. Together, they packed up what mattered most: cherished photographs, old books, and a few simple memories of happier times. Clara realized that while the canyon had been a source of strength, it was now a place tainted by the storms. And sometimes, leaving home is not an act of giving up, it's an act of survival. As the dust storms roared in the distance, Clara took one last look at the canyon. It felt like saying goodbye to a dear friend. A part of her would always carry its memory, a bittersweet token of the beauty that had once been. In those final moments, her heart ached knowing she would leave behind the land she had nurtured. However, she also felt a flicker of excitement for what lay ahead. With her brother by her side, she drove away from the canyon, watching the dust settle behind them. Every mile they traveled felt lighter, as if the dust lifted from her shoulders too. Weeks turned into months, and life began anew in a new town filled with bustling activity and laughter. Clara found work at a local farm, surrounded by open skies and green fields that whispered promises of renewal. In the evenings, she marveled at vibrant sunsets, ones that glowed brighter than any she remembered in the canyon. But the dust lingered in her dreams, and sometimes Clara would wake up gasping for air, feeling its weight. Yet she understood that healing takes time. The canyon had taught her resilience, a quiet strength she never knew she possessed. As the years rolled on, she forged connections with new friends and built a life filled with warmth and laughter. In time, she could look back at the canyon not just with sorrow, but with gratitude. It had been a part of her story, a chapter filled with struggle, but it also helped her discover the power within her soul. One quiet night, Clara stood on her porch again, a gentle breeze brushing against her cheek. She smiled softly, knowing she had faced the storms and come out stronger. Life was not about the dust that tried to bury you, it was about how you rise above it. And with that thought, Clara knew she was finally free. Clara stood at the edge of her porch, hands gripping the railing, heart racing as the earth roared beneath her feet. The rumble of a massive dust storm brewed on the horizon, swirling like a living creature, darkening the sky with its ferocious intent. At moments, she felt the weight of fear closing in, but there was also something thrilling about the power of nature. It reminded her of the canyon, a wild place that had once been her sanctuary. For years, Clara had called this rugged landscape home. The canyon was her cradle, a haven where she found solace in the shadow of towering cliffs. She loved wandering its trails, each twist and turn revealing new wonders. A rush of wildflowers in spring, shimmering rays of sunlight dancing on the river below. Every crevice seemed alive, whispering secrets only she could hear. But that beautiful bond was about to be shattered. With each passing day, the dust storms grew stronger, relentless and unforgiving. What had once been gentle breezes became harsh winds, racing across the land with a vengeance. Clara tried to ignore the first signs, convincing herself it was just another dry spell. But as the days turned to weeks, and the weeks into months, she realized this was no ordinary drought. The dust seeped into every corner of her life, bringing not just dirt, but an unbearable heaviness. The canyon, once vibrant, began to change. Clara watched helplessly as her garden succumbed to the dry air, flowers wilting, vines curling up like forgotten memories. She clung to the hope that nature would bounce back, but with each storm, that hope faded. The storms transformed the landscape, stripping away the beauty she had known. The skies that had once embraced her with warmth now loomed overhead like a predator. Clara tried to fight back. She filled burlap sacks with dirt, hoping to build a barrier against the creeping tide of dust. She swept her porch daily, wiping away the remnants of her dreams, but every time she opened the door, the wind rushed in like an angry ghost, mocking her efforts. The canyon, her dear friend, was betraying her, and soon the walls of her home began to close in. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky a dim gray, Clara stared at the darkness moving closer. The wind howled outside, sounding almost like a chorus of anguished voices. That's when so many memories came rushing back. Family dinners filled with laughter, long hikes with friends who shared her love for the outdoors, and quiet moments of solitude where the world felt just right. But all of that felt like a distant echo now, a faded chapter in a book she couldn't bear to finish. Weeks passed and the dust grew fierce. Clara began to withdraw, craving interaction but feeling too suffocated to reach out. She found herself sitting on the porch day after day, knees pulled to her chest, eyes glued on the horizon where the canyon met the sky. It was a lonely existence, one that stifled her soul. The few neighbors who remained grew quiet too, their laughter replaced with silent resignation. Desperation hung heavy in the air, and one day, on a particularly blustery afternoon, Clara finally made the call. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed the number she had avoided for too long. It was her brother, James. Clara, his voice was a lifeline, and she could hear the worry beneath his words. I can't stay here much longer, she admitted, her throat tight. Within a few days, James arrived. He pulled up in an old pickup, dust swirling around him like a protective shield. Clara felt a rush of emotion pour over her, a mix of relief and regret. They embraced tightly as if holding on to something they feared might disappear. You don't have to go through this alone, he said with determination, and that spark of connection reignited something deep within Clara. Together, they set out to fight the dust monster, battling it like soldiers on the front line. But soon they realized that their efforts were like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. The storms intensified, fierce and wild, tearing through the canyon with no remorse. They blocked windows, covered every inch of exposed space, but the dust slipped inside, coating everything in a layer of despair. It became a silent predator, stalking her dreams, stealing the joy from her heart. One evening, Clara stood in the kitchen, watching the sunset turn the sky into a canvas of fiery colors, but the brilliant hues only made the darkness of the dust feel more suffocating. As the sun disappeared, she felt the weight of grief settle deep inside her. How had this beautiful place turned so cruel? Let's take a drive, James suggested, breaking her spiraling thoughts. Reluctantly, Clara agreed. They hopped into the truck and drove along the winding roads, the engine humming a comforting tune. The wind whipped through the open windows, carrying away the thick weight of sadness, even if just for a moment. As they approached the canyon, Clara felt her heart race with both love and sorrow. It was beautiful yet haunting, the shadows stretching over the barren land like an ominous reminder of what had been lost. They parked and stepped outside, the earthy smell of dust and decay filling the air. Clara looked at the canyon, her eyes tracing the rocky outcrops she had climbed so many times before. "It used to be alive here, I loved it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. James nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "It's okay to feel what you're feeling." In that moment, Clara realized she was trapped by more than just dust. She was clinging to the canyon like a safety blanket, afraid to let go, afraid to venture into an uncertain future. But the truth was beginning to settle in. This was not the home she had known and loved. This was a place that had turned hostile, leaving her isolated and broken. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the canyon into a strange twilight, Clara made a choice. She would leave, not because she was surrendering, but because she was reclaiming her life. The dust had taken so much, but it would not take her spirit. In the days that followed, Clara and James packed up her things, every box a testament to the memories she had carved into the canyon. With every item she placed into the truck, Clara felt a strange sense of relief. She wasn't running away, she was stepping into the unknown, choosing to embrace whatever came next. The day of departure arrived, and Clara stood at her front door one last time. The wind howled, wiry fingers tugging at her clothes, trying to pull her back. She took a deep breath, clutching her brother's hand tightly. "Let's do this," she said, voice resolute. Together they drove away, leaving behind the dust, the anguish, and the memories that had begun to feel like chains. The canyon receded in the rearview mirror, a majestic silhouette against the fading light. Clara took one last look, the ache in her heart bittersweet. But as they drove further into the distance, she felt something shift inside her, surge of hope. Weeks later, in a new town filled with life and possibility, Clara began to heal. She rented a cozy little apartment with a view of lush green hills. Here the air felt sweet and fresh, every sunrise a promise of new beginnings. She found a job at a local art gallery, surrounded by color and creativity, something she had long yearned for. The laughter of her coworkers, the warmth of genuine connection, each day brought fresh blooms into her life, but the canyon still lingered in her mind. At night, Clara sometimes woke in a panic, the dust chasing her through dreams. Yet with each passing day, the memories became softer, less painful. She began to paint again, capturing the beauty of her new surroundings on canvas, each stroke of the brush a reminder of her resilience. As time flowed forward like a river, Clara realized she was discovering herself anew. She made friends, laughed often, and shared stories that made her feel whole again. The scars of the canyon remained, but they were becoming part of her story, not chains, but badges of courage. Finally, on a quiet evening, she took a moment to sit on her back porch, the sun setting in a burst of colors more vivid than she had ever seen. Instead of dread, she felt only peace, a sense of happiness bubbling up from her core. It was a reminder that sometimes, letting go of what weighs you down opens the door to brighter tomorrows. Clara stood, facing the horizon, feeling the gentle breeze on her skin. From the dust, she had risen, transformed. The canyon had driven her out, but it had also led her to find the strength within. And in that moment, she finally understood. Home is not just a place, but a feeling that lives inside your heart. Clara stood frozen in her yard, eyes wide, as the dark cloud over the canyon twisted and churned like a beast awakening from slumber. It wasn't the usual dust storm, this one felt alive. The ground rumbled, a low growl that vibrated through her bones. It was the moment she knew she could no longer ignore the impending darkness swallowing her home. For years, Clara found comfort near the canyon, where cerulean skies met rugged rocks and vibrant wildflowers danced in the breeze. The canyon was not just a setting, it was a character in her life's story, whispering secrets and cradling her dreams. Clara spent countless hours wandering its trails, feeling free and alive. Every crack in the earth felt like an invitation, calling her to explore deeper into its mysteries. But now, that inviting spirit twisted into something menacing. The storms had started slowly, soft winds stirring the dust from the earth. At first, Clara welcomed the breezes, thinking them just the normal dance of nature. She would often lean against her porch railing, watching clouds drift by, soaking in the warmth of the sun. As time went on, though, the winds grew fierce, howling through the canyon like a pack of wolves, biting and tearing at her joy. What had once been bright and lush now faded day by day. The garden she adored, filled with blooming flowers and herbs, fell victim to the relentless dry spells. One summer morning, Clara stepped outside to find the vibrant petals shriveled and brown, as if the life had been sucked right out of them. Her heart sank. Each wilting flower mirrored her own spirit, diminished, creased by creeping shadows. Then came the silence. Once alive with the sounds of nature, the canyon grew quiet, a heavy blanket of despair settling over it. The birds stopped singing and the animals retreated to safer grounds, leaving only the gusting winds to fill the void. Clara felt it, that suffocating stillness. It crept into her bones like a chilling fog. As neighbors began to leave, packing up and driving away, the loneliness pressed harder against her chest. Desperate to hold onto her home, Clara fought back. She would often don an old scarf, covering her mouth and nose to limit the dust seeping into her lungs. With hands calloused and raw, she staggered through her garden, trying to pull life from the parched soil. She buried her fingertips deep, yearning to coax the earth back to life, but nothing seemed to respond. The ground felt as barren as her heart, abandoned even by hope. As each storm swept through, the world outside transformed into a ghostly landscape. Clara could barely recognize her surroundings. The canyon murmured warning signs it wanted to be left alone. She could feel its sorrow and anger pulsing through the earth. Each time she ventured out to confront it, she met the swirling maelstrom, a menacing force mocking her fragility. Fear and frustration built up inside her, leaving her feeling powerless. She began to isolate herself further, driven by the belief that if she just endured, things might turn around. The silence of her home became unbearable, punctuated only by the whispering winds. Days turned into weeks, and the dust invaded every aspect of her life, settling into the forgotten corners of her heart. One night, as the familiar howl echoed outside, Clara woke from a restless sleep. Panic gripped her. She felt the dust filling her lungs as shadows cloaked her room. She stumbled to the window, hoping to glimpse the world she once loved. Instead, she found a swirling vortex of sand, suffocating the moonlight. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she realized she no longer recognized the landscape outside. This canyon, once a friend, now felt like a cruel enemy. On the edge of desperation, Clara decided to call her brother, a voice from the past that she hadn't heard in so long. She dialed the number, hands trembling. The phone rang, each tone echoing her anguish. His voice was a tide of relief that swept away her despair. "It's the canyon," she replied, voice quivering. "I can't breathe." In no time, James arrived, his presence a warm embrace against the cold grip of despair that had settled over her life. They stood on the porch together, staring into the stormy darkness. The howling winds felt like a growing chorus of agony, but in that moment, Clara found comfort in her brother's solidarity. They spoke of memories tied to the canyon, the hikes, the laughter, the bright days beneath the sun. Each word became a lifeline, tethering her to the beauty that still lingered in her past. But reality soon overshadowed those memories. They watched the dust storms marching in waves, relentless and wild. "You can't fight this alone," he told her, voice firm yet gentle. Clara nodded, tears welling as she realized he was right. The struggle weighed too heavily for one heart. Together, they worked on making her home bearable again. They sealed windows, barricaded doors, but every time the wind changed, it slithered through, taunting her. The storms mocked her attempts to reclaim her sanctuary, proving that the dust was as unyielding as time itself. But hope flickered in Clara's heart as her brother stayed by her side, holding her hand through the chaos. Then came the day when Clara sat on her porch, surveying the barren land that once thrived. James turned to her, his voice steady. "Maybe it's time to think about leaving, sis." Those words ignited an internal battle. Leaving felt like surrendering, a defeat she was not ready to accept. But the canyon had taken so much it became a dark weight she carried daily. As dusk fell, the air grew heavy with uncertainty. Clara closed her eyes and envisioned the life she wanted, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and sunlight. In the days that followed, the inevitability of leaving began to settle in. Clara and James planned their departure, going through photo albums, remembering moments frozen in time. They laughed through tears as they sifted through memories, every photo a reminder of joy. Packing became a bittersweet endeavor. She filled boxes with items that felt like pieces of her identity. Photographs of friends, books that had fueled her imagination, painting supplies waiting to be used. With every item packed, Clara felt a little weight lift, yet another layer of her heart remained heavy. The day came when Clara stood at the foot of her porch for the last time. The wind howled around her as though trying to bid her farewell with a fierce embrace. She took a deep breath, filled with dust, pain, and the scent of nostalgia. But beneath it all, she sensed an ember of hope igniting. This would be her final goodbye to the canyon and the world she once loved. With James by her side, she climbed into the truck, feeling an unfamiliar mix of fear and courage. She looked out at the swirling storm, the dark clouds swirling like a tempestuous sea. "I'm ready," she said to herself, almost in disbelief at the strength she found in her voice. As they drove away, Clara felt the grip of the canyon slowly releasing her. The dust, once a suffocating presence, faded behind them, leaving only a trail of memories in its wake. She watched as the landscape transformed, each mile marking a step toward liberation. The weight lifted off her shoulders, revealing a horizon filled with possibilities. In the weeks that followed, they settled in a new town, a vibrant stretch of land dotted with life. Clara found a cozy apartment that welcomed her with light and laughter. Everyday worries transformed into new dreams as she filled her space with colorful art and thoughtful inspiration. The air felt fresher here, nourishing her spirit like a long-lost friend. But the canyon still lingered. On silent nights when shadows danced across her wall, Clara would sometimes awaken, gasping for air as memories clashed with nightmares. Even in her quiet apartment, the dust felt pervasive, a ghost that refused to let her forget. Each day was a step toward a new beginning, but the journey of healing would take time. Slowly, with each passing day, Clara learned to breathe. She found a job at a local gallery, surrounded by vibrant colors and aspiring artists who embraced creativity. Here, the laughter echoed in her heart. She painted again, capturing the bright landscapes that surrounded her, each stroke liberating the bonds forged by dust and despair. As seasons changed, so did Clara. She ventured into new relationships, each connection helping to weave a tapestry of hope. Dancing under stars, sharing stories, building dreams, all of it rooted in the freedom she fought so hard to embrace. The canyon transformed in her mind, evolving from a symbol of loss to one of resilience. Years later, standing on her back porch, Clara gazed out at the horizon bathed in golden sunlight. The warmth enveloped her like a long-awaited hug, wrapping her in the promise of a bright future. The dust had indeed driven her out, but in doing so, it revealed the strength she never knew she possessed. As she turned to re-enter her warm home, Clara felt the canyon resting in her heart, not as an anchor, but as a reminder of growth. She had emerged from the darkness, emerging like a wildflower pushing through the cracks of the unforgiving earth. This was her story, a journey shaped by dust, yes, but also one defined by resilience and renewal. Clara smiled, ready to embrace anything the future might hold. She finally understood, home isn't just a place, it's where love and hope take root. Clara stood at the edge of her porch, squinting into the distance as the sun dipped below the horizon. The comforting beauty of the canyon stretched before her, but something dark was coming. A thick wave of dust rolled in like a menacing army, swallowing the vibrant colors of dusk in its grasp. It was a sight that sent a flicker of panic racing through her chest, but Clara couldn't tear her gaze away. It felt like a warning, a promise that her life was about to change forever. The canyon had always been Clara's sanctuary. From the moment she first arrived, she felt an unmistakable connection to its towering walls and winding paths. This was where she had wandered for hours, tracing the curves of the earth, whispering secrets to the wind. She had built a life among the canyons, filled with joy, laughter, and dreams that climbed as high as the cliffs. But now that life hung delicately in the balance, teetering on the edge of an uncertain future. Days turned into weeks, and the dust storms became less forgiving. It began subtly, a moment where she couldn't see the stars like she used to, where the sun struggled to break through the haze. Clara tried to dismiss it at first, chalking it up to nature's whims, yet each storm grew more intense, each gust more menacing. Wildflowers that once painted her garden faded into the brown of despair, leaving her feeling desolate and abandoned. Every storm felt like a reminder of everything she was about to lose. Clara watched as the landscape shifted from vibrant to muted, echoing the emptiness that began to creep into her heart. She fought relentlessly against the encroaching weight of the dust, spending hours working in her garden, pulling stubborn weeds from the dried-up soil, hoping to coax life back into the earth. Her fingers were raw, but it felt like her only defense against the hunger of the desert air. One evening, as the sky darkened and the wind howled outside her window, Clara sat in her dimly lit living room, surrounded by shadows of memories. She poured herself a cup of tea, trying to find comfort in the familiar. But something felt wrong. Silence hummed in the air, drowning out the comforting sounds of her once vibrant home. Inside, the wind swept up debris, transforming familiarity into an eerie ghost town. Clara looked around her home, feeling the weight of what had been. She spotted an old photo on the mantel, a snapshot of her standing proudly in front of the canyon, a vibrant smile lighting up her face. Memories flooded back, family hikes, laughter echoed among the cliffs, her brother teasing her about her fear of heights. Those moments felt so distant now, overshadowed by the relentless storms stealing away her joy. Hope began to feel like a distant memory. The canyon, once a friend, now morphed into a haunting specter. Clara felt trapped in a cycle of despair, huddled at the edge of her life, where every breath felt like a battle against an unseen foe. She withdrew from neighbors, no longer joining community gatherings, no longer celebrating the simple joy of togetherness. It seemed pointless when all anyone could talk about was the dust and the devastation it was bringing. The day that changed everything began like any other. Clara woke up to find her home cloaked in a fine layer of dust, intricate patterns settling over her furniture like a soft shroud. The dust felt like the last breath of the canyon, exhaling that which it couldn't keep. Frustration bubbled over as she swept her living room for what felt like the millionth time that week. But it was later that evening, as the shadows lengthened, that the true weight of her isolation struck her. Clara stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, but all she could taste was grit. The wind wrapped around her, a suffocating embrace. She looked out toward the canyon where darkness swallowed everything whole. Yet within her heart something stirred, a flicker of defiance igniting. Clara marched to her old pickup truck, heart racing with an emerging sense of purpose. If the dust would try to drive her out, then she would make a stand. She determined to gather fellow neighbors, to rally together against this force that threatened to tear them all apart. They could face the storm united. But as she knocked on doors and spread her plan, Clara felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. Many of her neighbors had already packed up and left, abandoning the canyon in pursuit of greener pastures. Those who remained gave her sympathetic smiles, but ultimately chose silence over action. With each rejection, her heart sank a little deeper. The canyon was crumbling, and so was her community. Days turned into sleepless nights as Clara wrestled with her own thoughts. Every dust storm that rolled in felt like a personal attack against her resolve. Yet with the dawn of each new day, she felt a growing desire to turn her pain into passion. If she couldn't hold others back, she could at least make her final moments in the canyon resonate. As the dust turned day into night, Clara decided to invite everyone to one last gathering. She would host a community dinner under the stars, a final celebration of everything the canyon had given them. It felt like a last hurrah, a way to share memories one more time before the brutal winds tore them apart forever. She spent her days preparing, cooking from cherished family recipes that spoke of love and warmth. When the night of the gathering arrived, Clara felt a rush of hope ignite within her. Families brought their favorite dishes, laughter mingled with the breeze, and together they lit lanterns, their flickering flames creating a warm glow against the darkening sky. It was beautiful, a reflection of the life they once shared beneath the canyon's embrace. As stories were shared, Clara felt joy bubbling within her. But as the winds picked up, carrying whispers of doom, the feelings of uncertainty began to creep back. She stood, looking at her neighbors, and she understood this night was a bittersweet farewell. By coming together, they were acknowledging the beauty of their shared experiences even as the dust threatened to erase everything. The sky darkened further, and Clara felt urgency settle in like an unwelcome guest. Was this really the end? Just as the first gust of wind swept through, rattling the lanterns, she raised her voice. "We may lose our canyon, but we won't lose our memories." Around her, heads nodded in agreement, eyes glistening with determination. And in that instant, Clara realized that while the canyon was slipping through her fingers, it would never take away the love and connection that had blossomed between them. Even in the face of darkness, they had emerged together, stronger. In the days that followed, Clara felt a shift grow within her. Canyon was no longer just a landscape of sorrow. It had become a metaphor for resilience. She began a search for ways to preserve the memories through art. Picking up her paintbrush after months of neglect, she found solace in vivid colors that blended together much like the threads of her community. As she painted, the swirling colors echoed the emotions she had bottled up for too long. It became liberating. Each stroke became a memory, a tribute to the strength she was discovering within herself. While the dust continued to swirl outside, she began to breathe again, feeling a weight lift from her chest. There was liberation in creation, a way to reclaim her sense of self. But the dust was an ever-present force, relentless and unyielding. Clara found herself caught between her new life and the reality she faced. One morning, glancing out the window, she knew she couldn't linger indefinitely. A decision loomed heavy before her, to leave the canyon behind and take a step into the unknown, or stay and risk losing herself entirely in the storm. The winds howled like a restless spirit, urging her to act. Clara took a breath, feeling the quiver in her heart and the warmth in her chest. She realized she had to let go. The canyon would always be a piece of her, but it was not where she belonged anymore. She wanted to live, to grow, to continue exploring life's landscapes unshackled by the weight of dust. With a sense of urgency, Clara called James. "I need your help," she said, voice resolute yet trembling. He was there in a heartbeat, and together they took the next steps. Packing was not just about the physical items, it was an emotional release. Each box filled with memories brought healing, a softening of the sharp edges that had once held her captive. The day of departure arrived, the sun rising fiercely above the horizon, casting a golden light over the canyon. Clara stood at the edge of her porch one last time, the dust swirling around her feet like lingering ghosts, but she held her head high. She felt the canyon trying to pull her back, but she was no longer afraid. This place had taught her resilience, courage, and the beauty of connection. It would forever remain a part of her story, but now she was ready to write a new one. As she sat in the truck alongside James, they drove away, her heart racing with each mile. Tears welled up as she looked in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the canyon fading into the distance. The weight of the dust lifted from her heart, replaced with the thrill of possibility. Weeks later, Clara found herself in a new town, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and vibrant colors. The air was filled with the sweet smell of blooming flowers, a refreshing contrast to the dry dust that had once coated her soul. She began to create again, pouring her heart into her art, watching as new connections blossomed. But the canyon remained. On quiet nights, she found herself whispering to the memories, letting the dust of her past settle softly into a place of love rather than sorrow. Clara understood that sometimes life requires letting go, even if it's painful. And in that letting go, she discovered a vast expanse of new landscapes waiting to be explored. As the sun set over her new home, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. She had emerged from the storms, new and whole, ready to embrace whatever came next. The dust may have driven her out, but it had also led her to the realization that home is not just a place. It's found within, in memories cherished, friends made, and love that carries us through even the darkest of times. Clara had always felt a pull to the canyon, but that day, the ground trembled under her feet. The air crackled, heavy with tension, and a rumble shook the sky, a warning, she thought, but she couldn't put her finger on what it meant. Dust danced in the wind, swirling into a thick cloud that mirrored the storm in her heart. She stepped outside, feeling the weight of that dust wrapping around her like a shroud. It clung to her skin, filling her lungs as she took a deep breath. A chill raced down her spine, and she looked out at the water-streaked rocks, those majestic colors now blurring into a dull gray. The canyon that had once been her sanctuary felt like a dark labyrinth, threatening to swallow her whole. Clara had come to this place years ago, enchanted by its beauty. She had spent countless weekends hiking the trails, feeling the sun on her face, listening to the songs of birds echoing in the wide-open spaces. The canyon was alive, vibrant. It taught her secrets of the earth, igniting her passion for nature. But now something was changing, and the dust was just the beginning. The storms began gently enough, soft breezes that whispered promises of rain, but slowly they transformed into relentless gales. Small puffs turned into raging winds, invading every aspect of her life. Clara could hardly step outside without feeling the sting of grit against her skin. As the storms grew, day-to-day tasks became battles against the dust settling everywhere, and it seemed to infiltrate her very being. Days turned to weeks, and each storm dragged with it the whispers of abandonment. She watched as neighbors began to pack their lives into cardboard boxes, leaving behind homes filled with memories. The canyon had always held a sense of community, but suddenly it felt like a ghost town. Clara tried to reach out, to connect with those who remained, but conversations turned somber, and laughter faded into the howling winds that surrounded them. "Stay strong," her neighbor Bate had said during one of those frantic gatherings where they shared stories over cups of stale coffee. But Clara felt that strength begin to slip away with each passing storm. As the nights grew darker and more ominous, Clara felt the suffocating shadows closing in. Dust settled not just outside, but inside her heart, filling her with despair. It was in her dreams where she felt the worst, waking in a cold sweat, haunted by swirling clouds and the loss of everything she had once cherished. She could no longer see the stars peeking through the evening sky, a reminder of the light that once filled her world. One particularly fierce night, she lay awake, listening to the wind howl against her walls. She whispered to the darkness, her voice barely a breath. In that moment of vulnerability, she made a choice. She wouldn't wait for the dust to consume her entirely. She would confront it face to face. Gathering her courage, she picked up the phone and dialed her brother, who lived miles away in a bustling city where the sky still retained its blue. "James, I need help," she said, her voice shaking. "Things are getting worse here." Within days, he was there, stepping out of a car that shimmered like a promise in the distance. Clara ran to him, and he enveloped her in a warm hug, a comfort she desperately needed. They stood on her porch, facing the canyon together, and as the wind howled around them, she felt a flicker of hope ignite within. "We'll figure this out together," James assured her. But as they began to strategize, it became clear that the dust was not just weather. It was a force, an overwhelming presence that wanted to suffocate everything that made life beautiful. Each time they tried to clean up outside or seal windows, the dust mocked their efforts. It would find a way, slipping through the smallest cracks, a reminder of its dominance. Clara spent her days trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She would wake early, making coffee and watching the sunrise paint the canyon in colors that were quickly dulled by the returning dust. It felt selfish to enjoy the view when the world around her was falling apart, but as her eyes gazed at the cliffs stretching majestically into the sky, she felt a sense of belonging. "Look at that," she said one morning to James, who stood beside her, still groggy from sleep. James turned, squinting. "It is." As the days turned into weeks, the storms became increasingly ferocious, and Clara found herself overwhelmed. People who had once come to share meals and laughter no longer dared to venture outside. Those who remained slipped into hushed conversations and forlorn stares. She was losing them all to the fear of the dust that was closing in. In a moment of desperation, Clara decided to host a gathering, a potluck dinner, a final attempt to bring the community together, to wrest away some control against what felt inevitable. She planned every detail, pouring herself into her efforts like pouring sun and water into her wilting garden. She cooked her favorite family recipes, hoping the familiar flavors would remind her neighbors of their shared history. When the night arrived, Clara stood at her door, a light illuminating the path for her guests. She could hear laughter echoing in the distance, a symphony against the violent winds. People began to arrive, and she felt a glimmer of joy spark within her. As they gathered around the table, sharing stories and flooding the space with warmth, the room felt alive. Greg, a longtime neighbor, laughed, his eyes twinkling. Laughter flowed easily, a balm against their struggles. For a brief moment, the dust outside faded, replaced by the comfort of connection, a sense that they were not alone in this fight. Yet as the winds howled, tugging at the edges of the gathering, Clara felt the reality lurking beneath their merriment. The evening wore on, but the dust loomed like a predator, watching, waiting. Clara could feel anxiety prickling at the edges of her happiness. The sound of furniture scraping against wood mingled with the wind's roars, the once familiar canyon now seeming hostile. At one point, as Clara refilled glasses, she caught a whisper that drifted through the room. "I think we should leave," a neighbor suggested, quietly, almost shamefully. The room fell silent, and a chill settled over them as if the air had turned cold. Clara's heart sank as she watched her friends, fear visible on their faces. Each nod of agreement felt like a knife slicing through her resolve. This was the canyon they had cherished, the place filled with stories and laughter. But now it was a place they were preparing to abandon. Clara cleared her throat, but what if we fought back? Her voice rang with determination, though inside doubt clawed at her heart. But the fire had dimmed. As the night continued, many began to drift away. One by one they said goodbye, leaving Clara and James standing in the fading glow of their gathering. The dust slowly crept back in, as if reclaiming ownership of the land they loved. That night Clara turned to James, tears brimming in her eyes. What if this is it? He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you, he said softly. The warmth of his embrace grounded her, but she felt the canyon slipping away, the last whispers of a place that had once felt like home. As dawn broke, the world outside appeared shrouded in gloom. Clara made the difficult decision. There was no fighting against the dust anymore, not when it threatened the very essence of who she was. She would leave, not because she was defeated, but because it was time to start anew. In those early days of planning, Clara felt a mix of fear and renewed hope. Each box she packed was bittersweet, memories tangled within each dish, each picture. The canyon had been a part of her, but the dust filled her head with the realization that she could not anchor herself to a place that threatened to drown her spirit. On the day of her departure, Clara stood in front of the canyon for the last time. The wind whipped around her, the dust swirling like 1,000 tiny memories. It felt cruel, yet liberating. As she took a deep breath, she understood that this wasn't just goodbye, it was the beginning of a new chapter. James helped load the last few boxes into the truck. Clara glanced back one last time, and in that instant she felt a wave of warmth wash over her, a reminder of all the joy the canyon had brought her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were filled with gratitude, not despair. As they drove away, the dust settling behind them, Clara's heart raced with possibility. The road ahead was unfolding like a blank canvas waiting for paint. She no longer felt the weight of the storms. Instead, she felt the thrill of freedom. Weeks later, Clara found herself in a new town, filled with life and laughter that hadn't been present in so long. She rented a little apartment surrounded by green fields and vibrant colors. The air felt fresh, untainted by the dust that had once ruled her life. She found a job at a local art gallery where creativity sparked once again. As she painted, a new passion ignited within her, an expression of freedom and growth. Each brushstroke was a reflection of her journey, a tribute to the canyon that had once felt suffocating, yet had led her to this moment. Though some nights she woke in a panic, haunted by the swirling dust from her past, she learned to embrace those feelings. Clara began to understand the importance of memories, the lessons learned among the shadows of the canyon. She began to see the beauty in her story, one marked by resilience and rebirth. And as she watched the sun set over her new horizon, painting the sky in bold colors of orange and pink, she felt empowered. The dust had driven her away, but in doing so, it had opened up a world filled with possibilities. She learned that sometimes leaving a beloved place doesn't mean losing everything. It means making room for growth and new experiences. In her heart, the canyon would always have a place, a vivid backdrop to her past, but it would not define her future. Clara had stepped outside the confines of the dust, ready to embrace every twist and turn that life still held for her. Ready to write a new story, one filled with hope and the spirit of adventure. Clara stood at the edge of her porch, staring at the swirling wall of dust advancing across the horizon. It was a day like any other. The sun shone brightly above, and she felt warmth on her skin, but there was an unsettling silence surrounding her. Suddenly, that silence shattered as the wind howled, ripping through the canyon and sending a chill down her spine. She squinted against the swirling cloud, her heart racing. This storm felt different, not just a weather event, but a shifting of fate. Clara had lived near the canyon for years, its beauty resonating deep within her soul. It was a place where she had found solace, where wildflowers painted the earth and the birds sang like a symphony. She spent countless hours hiking its trails, breathing in the fresh air that felt electric in her lungs. The canyon had become her friend, but today it felt like an old friend twisted by some dark curse, and the dust seemed intent on stealing everything she held dear. As the day progressed, the dust storm began to grow in intensity. What had started as a harmless gust of wind transformed into a ferocious gale. Clara watched helplessly as her vivid garden succumbed to the gritty onslaught. The flowers she had nurtured were effortlessly ripped from their roots, resembling memories fading with each gust. She felt the loss in her bones, each flower a connection to her hope, her joy. By nightfall, the storm had unleashed its full fury. Clara sat in her living room, darkness closing in, and shadows danced around her like wraiths, each flicker of candlelight illuminating her growing despair. The wind howled outside, drowning out her thoughts, leaving only echoes of what used to be. She poured herself a glass of water, hands trembling, feeling anxiety creep up the back of her neck. The storm was relentless, but there was a deeper fear gnawing at her. It was as if the canyon itself were whispering that something was wrong, that the very ground beneath her was shifting. Days turned to weeks, and Clara felt engulfed by a sense of dread. The dust became more than just a weather phenomenon. It was an unyielding presence in her life. She found herself closing her windows and shutting her doors, afraid of what would slip inside. And day by day, she watched as neighbors packed their bags, leaving their homes behind in search of fresh air and clearer skies. The community, once alive with laughter and warmth, fell eerily silent. Clara felt like a ship stranded in a harbor, the tide gently pulling her away yet leaving her still. One evening, amid a particularly oppressive storm, she decided to reach out to her brother. She picked up the phone, fingers trembling as she dialed his number. She said when he answered, "I need help." He arrived within days. She welcomed him with an embrace, his sturdy presence offering comfort in a world that seemed to be crumbling around her. They stood on her porch, staring into the dark abyss where the canyon once offered beauty, now merely a silhouette against the angry sky. "We'll fight this together," he said, determination in his eyes. Together they began to prepare. They stocked up on supplies and sealed windows, desperately trying to create a barrier against the encroaching dust that seeped into every corner of her home. Yet, each day they woke to find the world around them coated in a fine layer of grime, as if a shadow had settled over the canyon itself. As Clara and James faced the dust storms, they tried to keep their spirits high. Long walks became a ritual where they would talk about the future and remember the laughter of friends who once filled the canyon with life. But the storms continued, each one heavy with the whispers of despair. It felt as though the canyon, a place bursting with life, was now a predator lurking in shadows, waiting to swallow them whole. Then came the day when James sat Clara down, his voice serious. "I think we need to consider leaving," he said gently. Clara's heart dropped as she felt that familiar wave of panic. She had never truly considered leaving. This was her home. She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He countered, a flicker of frustration cutting through his concern. Clara felt torn, caught between love for her home and the sense of impending doom that surrounded her. The dust was unrelenting, erasing memories and future dreams with each storm. As stress clawed at her, she suddenly felt a rush of clarity. Maybe leaving didn't mean defeat, maybe it meant survival. With James's help, she began to pack. Each box was filled with the essence of her life, mementos that had once made her heart swell with joy. Photographs showcased wide smiles during sun-drenched hikes, each one a snapshot of happiness among the cliffs. As she packed, she relived those moments, grounding herself in the strength that they brought. Days later, Clara stood at the edge of her porch one final time. The dust storm was ferocious, a swirling tempest that echoed the storm raging in her heart. With each passing moment, she felt the canyon watching, waiting, almost pleading with her. As the darkness closed in, she took a deep breath, realizing the uncertainty of her decision, but knowing that staying would mean losing herself entirely. With her heart pounding, she climbed into the truck with James, the weight of her decision hanging thick in the air. As they drove away, Clara glanced back one last time. The canyon loomed behind them, a mix of beauty and sorrow. The dust filled the air, swirling ominously, but as the landscape blurred, Clara felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Weeks passed, and she found herself in a new town filled with life and laughter. The air was fresher, the colors brighter. The weight of the dust began to lift from her shoulders, and as she settled into her new home, Clara felt revitalized, unshackled. She started working at a local art gallery where her love for creativity was reignited. Each brushstroke explored her emotions, pain, hope, resilience, all woven together on canvas. But even in this new chapter, Clara sometimes felt haunted by the canyon. In quiet moments, she would remember the swirling dust, the lost dreams, and the emptiness it left behind. The memories stung, yet they began to fade as new experiences filled her life. Laughter returned, friends became her family, and she rediscovered joy. One evening, at an art show featuring her work, Clara stood among the crowd, watching people connect with her pieces. As she gazed at a painting of the canyon filled with swirling colors and tumultuous emotion, she realized it wasn't just a representation of loss. It was a reflection of her journey of overcoming, of letting go and finding strength and resilience. And at that moment, she understood something crucial. Home isn't defined by a single place or memory. Home is the love you carry within, the connections you forge, and the courage you summon to move forward. It's the laughter shared with friends around a dinner table, the beauty found in new beginnings. Clara turned her gaze toward the horizon painted with brilliant colors. While the canyon would always remain a part of her story, it was no longer her anchor. She had risen from the dust, emerging with newfound strength and purpose. The storms may have driven her out, but they had also led her to discover the depth of her own spirit. As she stood in that gallery, surrounded by canvases alive with color and her journey etched in every stroke, Clara smiled. She realized that sometimes to find yourself, you must first let go of what weighs you down. She had not just left the canyon, she had embraced a future filled with endless possibilities. No storm could take that away from her. She was free, and she was ready to paint the next chapter of her life. Clara stood at her front door, staring at the brown clouds swirling in the distance. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like the ground was breathing in deep before unleashing a storm. Her heart raced as she recognized that familiar shape creeping closer to her home near the canyon. This was no ordinary dust storm. It felt more like an omen, twisting her gut in ways she couldn't explain. Just yesterday, the canyon had shimmered under the afternoon sun, bursting with colors of orange and deep reds, but today, doom loomed overhead. Clara remembered times when the canyon had been a vibrant canvas of joy. It had welcomed her with open arms, becoming a sanctuary of freedom. But as the dust storm approached, she felt its grip tighten on her throat. Months had passed since the storms began, each one bringing with it a wave of despair that seeped into her life like the dust infiltrating her home. At first, she brushed them off as a seasonal annoyance. The dust would coat her windowsill and settle on her furniture, but she could wipe it away. Soon, however, it became a steady invasion. The gusts raged day after day, creeping inside every crevice, leaving everything coated in a layer of gray, dulling the colors of her life. Clara ran her fingers over the railing of her porch, memories flooding back. She could still hear the joyous laughter of children playing, friends gathering for barbecues under the sprawling branches of the old oak tree. But now those echoes had faded, silenced by the relentless howling of the wind. Dust storms had chased away the vibrant life that once thrived in her community. Just one more storm, she thought, trying to convince herself. But with each storm, hope strained under the weight of reality. Her garden, once bursting with sunflowers, lay wilting, robbed of its life. She poured her love into that garden, careful to nurture every bloom, but nothing seemed to work. Dust choked the roots, stealing away her joy, leaving only despair. One rainy afternoon, she would sit in her living room and watch the dust swirl outside her windows, dripping with a sense of hopelessness. Clara felt trapped as days blurred into weeks and neighbors began to leave, packing their bags and driving into the unknown. With every goodbye, a piece of her world crumbled away. She couldn't help but worry, was she next? On a particularly dark evening, the weight of the world settled heavily on her shoulders. Clara sat cross-legged on her living room floor, staring blankly at faded photographs scattered around her. They were wild and colorful snapshots of hikes in the canyon, laughter echoing against the cliffs, a time when life felt bright and full of promise. But now those images felt like ghostly reminders of the life she was losing. Enough, she whispered to herself. In a moment of clarity fueled by desperation, Clara decided she would host a neighborhood gathering. Perhaps they could muster up the strength to face the storms together. The idea felt like a flicker of hope against the suffocating darkness. With newfound determination, she crafted flyers describing her vision, a potluck dinner filled with laughter, love, and memories under the stars. As the evening approached, Clara stood in her kitchen, preparing her mother's famous chili, the warm aroma filling the air. She felt nervous but hopeful. Slowly, neighbors trickled in, bringing their own dishes, and for the first time in months, Clara felt a shift in the atmosphere. The smell of comfort food filled her home and chased away some of the lingering shadows. Laughter erupted as they gathered around the table, sharing stories and reminiscing about their favorite hikes. Clara felt her heart swell with gratitude. Maybe, just maybe, they could face the storms together. Discussions turned to lighthearted banter, and for a brief moment, it felt as if they were reclaiming their home from the jaws of despair. But as the clock struck midnight, the laughter dwindled, replaced by the unmistakable sound of wind howling outside. The familiar feeling of dread returned. The dust storms were haunting reminders of their struggle. One by one, Clara's neighbors began to leave, each goodbye echoing the fear they all carried inside. And like that, hope broke apart once again. In the days that followed, Clara became a shell of her former self. She retreated, avoiding the world outside her door. Every gust of wind felt like a threat, each grain of dust a reminder of her isolation. As she stepped outside, she looked at the canyon, now cloaked in fog, and wondered how to move forward. Everything she loved was slipping away. One evening, she picked up the phone and dialed her brother. "James," she said, her voice catching. He arrived the following day, sensing the weight on her shoulders before even stepping through the door. Without saying a word, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, grounding her in a reality that felt distant. "We'll figure this out," he assured her, his eyes gleaming with determination. They walked outside, standing at the edge of the porch where the dust danced like an angry ghost around them. He asked, "I want to save this place," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she felt inside. They made a plan. Together, they would fight against the storms. They gathered supplies, fortified the windows, and set up masks to wear when venturing outside. Each sandstorm they faced became a battle cry, a reminder of their strength. But as the dust rolled and time again, it often felt like they were losing the war. One evening, while James was patching up a window, Clara caught a glimpse of the canyon. The sun was setting, and for a moment the skies lit up in orange and pink, the dust shimmering like gold. It reminded her of the beauty that had once enveloped her. She exclaimed, her heart leaping at the sight. James turned, and in that moment they both felt it, the canyon's spirit, still alive but shadowed by dust. But even with that spark, the reality gripped her heart. Later that night, as Clara lay in bed, she wrestled with the thought of leaving the canyon behind. The dust had become a relentless monster, and she was exhausted from fighting it. Soon after, neighbors who had held on began to flee, one after another. They left behind homes filled with memories, their laughter echoing until silence enveloped the landscape. Clara felt torn, frightened to think of abandoning the community that had nurtured her, but equally terrified of watching everything she loved wither away. One Saturday morning, she ventured outside, feeling the wind whip around her. The dust taunted her, as if testing her resolve. She took a deep breath and headed toward the canyon, hoping to find clarity amidst the chaos. The vibrant rock formations, though duller than before, still held a sense of grandeur. But as she stood on a ridge overlooking the vastness, the weight of the dust pressed down on her. It was in that moment of desperation that she broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she slid to the ground, overwhelmed by anxiety and sorrow for everything slipping away. She cried out, her voice echoing against the stone. The canyon, silent and stoic, offered no answers. It left her feeling more alone than ever. Days later, with her strength dwindling, Clara made a call that would change everything. She dialed James, her throat tight. "I think we may need to leave," she said, each word heavy with finality. That evening, while packing belongings, Clara felt the weight of nostalgia in every box she filled. With each photograph, story, and piece of art, she felt as if she was packing away parts of her heart. And as the storm raged outside, she recognized that leaving was not an act of defeat, it was an act of reclaiming her life. On the day of her departure, emotions stirred like a whirlwind inside her. With her brother behind the wheel of a pickup truck full of memories, Clara looked back at the canyon one last time. The storm clouds loomed ominously, but she also felt a sense of release. This was her farewell to despair, an acceptance of growth beyond the dust. As they drove away, the canyon receded into the horizon, and she finally felt the shackles of her former life loosen. The journey ahead seemed uncertain, but it also glimmered with possibility. There was a freedom that came in letting go, in allowing herself to move toward the unknown. Weeks later, Clara settled in a new town. The air felt different, lighter, as if it offered a new beginning. Her laughter mingled with others, new friendships blossomed, and she found solace in the colors of a fresh start. Each corner of her apartment felt alive with new dreams, and she rediscovered passions that had lain dormant during those dark days. But even as she thrived, shadows of the canyon lingered. Some nights she would wake up, remembering the dust storm and the swirling grief. Yet instead of fear, she began to allow herself a flicker of gratitude. It was through the darkness that she had rediscovered her resilience. One sunny afternoon, Clara found herself painting again, vibrant colors splashing across the canvas as she embraced the beauty of new landscapes. Each brushstroke reflected the journey she had taken, a testament to her growth. The canyon had shaped her, yes, but it would not define her. And as she painted, she allowed a smile to break through the memories. Somewhere along the way, Clara learned that home could expand beyond a single place. It could be the laughter shared with friends, the warmth of community, and the understanding that growth often comes wrapped in pain. Months passed, and each day became a new chapter in her story. Clara finally stood at the forefront, ready to embrace whatever life held next. The dust may have driven her out, but it had also led her to find the strength she never knew existed within her. In the end, Clara came to understand an essential truth. Sometimes stepping away from what you love doesn't mean losing it. It means allowing yourself the grace to discover new influences and new horizons. The canyon would always live in her heart, but she would no longer be chained to it. As she put the finishing touches on her latest painting, an abstract piece inspired by the colors of her journey, Clara felt alive. And for the first time in a long while, she felt free, ready to embrace the future, dust and all. Clara stood on her porch, heart pounding as a dark cloud rolled over the canyon. It wasn't just any dust storm, it felt alive, twisting and churning like a living creature, hungry for the very essence of life. In the fading light, she could barely see the once vibrant colors of her garden, now dulled by the encroaching shroud. It was a sight that made her stomach drop, thrusting her into a whirlwind of anxiety. The canyon had always been her haven. It was where she sought peace, where the sun grazed the rocks in a kaleidoscope of colors and the wind carried melodious whispers through the narrow paths. Clara had built her life around its beauty, waking each morning to the sound of birds and the caress of gentle breezes. But now, as darkness descended along with the dust, that sanctuary felt like a husk, abandoned and desolate. "Not again," she muttered, frustration boiling below the surface. She remembered the earlier storms that had thrashed against her home, rattling windows and choking the air with despair. Each storm had taken something precious from her, like a thief in the night stealing joys she thought would last forever. With each gust, the canyon seemed to refuse her any sense of normalcy. Determined to fight back, she grabbed her gardening gloves and stepped outside, only to be met with a wall of gritty air that felt like a slap to the face. This isn't right, she thought, pulling her scarf tightly around her neck, but the winds roared louder, mocking her resolve as they kicked up clouds of dust. Clara spent hours trying to shield her flowers, but it felt futile. Each petal turned brown, each leaf curled under the relentless assault, a mirror of the panic rising within her. Days turned into weeks, and Clara felt the walls of her home close in around her. The storms became a constant companion, rattling her sanity, leaving her feeling isolated and hollow. What once was a vibrant community now felt dreadfully quiet. One by one, neighbors packed up and left, abandoning their homes like shipwrecked sailors fleeing a sinking vessel. Clara felt a part of her heart crack open each time she watched a friend drive away, their tires kicking up the very dust that swirled in her dreams, turning every memory to ash. Then one evening, as she sat in her dimly lit living room, the wind howled outside like a creature in pain. The question hung in the air, a haunting echo that refused to leave her. She felt lost, battling shadows that slipped into her mind, drowning her hopes. Desperation led her to pick up the phone and call her brother. "James, I need you," she confessed, voice trembling. Within days, James arrived, bringing an air of stability she dearly craved. He stepped out of his car, dust swirling around him like an aura. Clara rushed into his arms, grateful for the warmth of family in her chaotic world. As they stood on her porch, James turned to face the canyon. They made a plan to fight back against the dust that enveloped their lives. Together, they fortified windows, although Clara knew that no barrier could protect against the power of nature's wrath. Slowly, they ventured outside more often, battling the elements as they swept up remnants of lost dreams. But with every scrape and struggle, Clara felt the dust creep back, smothering her spirit. One night, after a particularly brutal storm, they sat on Clara's porch, the air heavy with silence. The dust was quieter now, but its weight throbbed in her chest. Clara exclaimed, frustration bubbling to the surface. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Maybe it's a sign, Clara." She stared at him, disbelief clouding her mind. "Let go." "Is it, though?" His words prickled her skin, but deep down she felt the truth lurking in the shadows. As the weeks rolled on, the dust didn't let up. It pressed against her like an unwanted guest, demanding her attention, pulling her into its suffocating embrace. Clara watched as friends who had become her family began to leave. People she had shared laughter and late-night talks with were gone, one after the other, leaving only echoes of their presence. In the hazy light, Clara sat with James, weighing her heart against her head. "I can't do this anymore," she finally confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, understanding the grief in her voice. They spent the evening in earnest conversation, weighing their options, their thoughts tangled with fear and longing. James suggested tentatively. Clara's heart raced, the thought dancing like a flame before her. Could she really leave? The canyon had been her world, but as she gazed into the dust swirling like a vortex of lost dreams, she felt a flicker of hope trying to break through. The very next day, Clara made a decision. She set out for the canyon one last time, a final farewell that felt loaded with significance. The air was heavy, as though the land itself sighed deeply, aware of the weight of her choices. As Clara stood in the canyon, she closed her eyes and reached out, trying to grasp every essence of her memories. The laughter, the beauty, the heartbeat of life that once pulsed there. But before she could fully process her emotions, the earth rumbled beneath her feet, a low growl that sent her heart racing. The wind picked up, swirling around her, scratching at her skin like claws. Panic surged through Clara as the dust began to rise, blurring her vision. She screamed, trying to make her way back through the raging storm. In the chaos, she stumbled, her heart racing as she fought against the forces trying to push her back. The wind howled like a wild beast, shoving her into the labyrinth of stone. Clara grasped for survival, battling against everything threatening to swallow her whole. Just when she thought she might lose herself to the storm, a figure emerged from the swirling dust. It was James, sprinting toward her. Clara felt a mixture of relief and terror flood her senses. He shouted, his voice barely cutting through the roar of the wind. The storm twisted around them, fierce and unyielding, but she could see the look of determination on his face. "You have to come with me." With a surge of strength fueled by adrenaline, Clara reached out to him. Together they pushed through the storm, battling the overwhelming force of nature. Each step felt like they were defying fate itself, as every gust threatened to rip them apart. Just when they thought they had finally escaped the worst, the ground trembled violently. Clara gasped, stumbling as a rockslide rumbled down the canyon wall, dust filling the air with such ferocity that it blinded her. James shouted, and she clung to him, fear amplifying every moment. As they stood there, a massive stone dislodged, tumbling down the cliffside toward them. Everything seemed to slow, and she could feel her heart thunder in her chest, one thought consuming her. Would they make it out alive? With a final push, they leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding disaster as the stone crashed to the ground, a thunderous roar echoing against the canyon walls. Clara tumbled, landing hard on her side, pain shooting through her. But when she looked up, James was there, breathing heavily, eyes wide with resolve. He asked, kneeling beside her. All at once, Clara realized something vital. The canyon, once a beloved home, had become a monster, trying to consume her very spirit. The dust had turned from a mere annoyance to a tempest of rage. It was time to take a stand. "We need to leave, James." She pulled herself up, urgency flooding through her veins as she glimpsed the destruction their beloved canyon had wrought. As they found their way back to the car, Clara felt a stir of anticipation mingled with fear. The dust still swirled fiercely behind them, but she knew she could no longer be held captive by it. In that moment, she understood that her choice wasn't just about leaving the canyon, it was about reclaiming her life. As they drove away, she felt tears of relief and anger mix on her cheeks. The dust storm might have driven her away, but it also propelled her into the embrace of something better as they ventured into the unknown. But just as hope began to fill the air, the ground trembled again. Clara clenched the door handle, adrenaline fueling her heart. In the distance, she saw another dust cloud forming bigger, darker, and more ominous than ever before. "Not again," she whispered, dread curling in her stomach as they raced forward, unsure of what would come next. Would the canyon continue to haunt her? Would the dust always be a part of her story? As the truck sped toward the unknown, Clara's heart was heavy with the weight of her journey. Little did she know this was only the beginning of a much larger storm, one that would challenge everything she believed about herself and the very meaning of home.